The glass doors of Sky Corp swung open as Alex Weston walked through the bustling lobby, his presence commanding attention. Tall, impeccably dressed in a dark tailored suit, his every step seemed to echo authority. People paused to greet him with respect, though Alex always remained humble, offering a smile or a nod in return. Despite the empire he had built, Alex never let his success cloud his decency. Sky Corp was his creation, a giant in the corporate world, but it was his compassion and humanity that made him beloved. On this particular morning, Alex felt a weight that had little to do with his company's latest financial triumphs. His personal life was unraveling, and no amount of success could patch up the growing void in his heart. The marriage that once seemed like the perfect union was now little more than a hollow partnership. Naya, his wife, had changed. Or maybe she had always been that way, and he had been too blind to see it. He had married her for all the wrong reasons: beauty, prestige, and wealth. Naya came from an old money family, as wealthy as Alex, and their marriage had made sense on paper. But now, it felt like a prison. Alex made his way to the top floor, where his private office overlooked the skyline of the city. The panoramic view offered a moment of solace. Yet, as he sat behind his massive oak desk, the emptiness settled in once again. Wealth couldn't fill the void left by a cold, loveless marriage. He glanced at a photo on his desk, a formal portrait of him and Naya taken years ago at some charity gala. Naya, in her elegant gown, had looked every bit the part of the perfect wife. But behind the glamorous facade was a woman who had lost her warmth, her kindness, and her compassion. She had grown into someone cruel, someone who took pleasure in controlling others. Even the staff at their mansion walked on eggshells around her, fearing her unpredictable temper. Alex leaned back in his chair, his mind drifting, wondering how things had come to this. How had he allowed his life to become so controlled by appearances, by the demands of wealth? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," he called, straightening up. It was his assistant, Jenny, a reliable and efficient woman in her early 30s. She walked in with a stack of papers, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Mr. Weston, here are the reports you requested. Also, the board meeting is scheduled for this afternoon at 2 p.m., she said, placing the documents on his desk. Alex nodded absent-mindedly. "Thank you, Jenny." Jenny hesitated, sensing something off with her boss. She had worked with Alex for years and knew when something weighed heavily on his mind. "Is everything all right, Mr. Weston?" she asked gently. Alex gave her a tired smile. "Just a lot on my plate, Jenny." "Nothing to worry about." She nodded, understanding that he wouldn't say more. "If you need anything, let me know." With that, she left him alone once more. As the door clicked shut behind her, Alex leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk and running a hand through his hair. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life was spiraling out of control, and for once, there seemed to be no solution. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Naya was in one of her usual moods. The grand estate, sprawling with endless rooms and meticulously landscaped gardens, was a place of beauty. But inside it felt like a palace built on tension. In the kitchen, the staff worked quickly and quietly, trying to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Naya had already screamed at one of the maids for something as trivial as placing a vase of flowers in the wrong room. Now, she was pacing the living room, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor as she looked over the latest interior design catalogs. "I told them I wanted the new furniture by this week," she snapped, tossing the catalog onto the glass coffee table. "Do they think I have time to wait around for their incompetence?" The butler, Charles, stood quietly by the door, waiting for further instructions. He had worked in the Weston household for many years, and he had learned how to navigate Naya's moods. But it was becoming more difficult to tolerate her outbursts. There was only so much disrespect one could endure. Naya glanced at Charles, her eyes narrowing. "Are you just going to stand there? I need you to call the designers and tell them if the furniture isn't here by tomorrow, I'll have them all fired." "Yes, ma'am." Charles replied evenly, bowing slightly before leaving the room. Naya sighed dramatically, throwing herself onto the sofa. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her social media, her lips pursed in dissatisfaction. Nothing seemed to satisfy her anymore, not the lavish parties, not the expensive vacations, not even her own husband. Alex had become a ghost in their marriage. He was distant, always busy with work, always distracted. Naya resented him for it, but she refused to admit that her own behavior might be part of the problem. She had grown up in a world where power and wealth were everything, and she had mastered the art of control. She expected perfection from everyone around her, and when they failed, she unleashed her wrath. But lately, Alex's indifference had begun to grate on her. She could see the way he avoided her, how he stayed late at work just to escape the suffocating atmosphere of their home. And worst of all, she sensed there was someone else on his mind. Isabel carefully dusted the shelves in Alex's study, her movements quiet and efficient. She had been working at the Weston mansion for a year now. And in that time, she had learned to stay invisible. The fewer waves she made, the safer her position. Her mother depended on her. Ever since her father's death and her mother's accident that took her sight, Isabel had taken on the burden of caring for her small family. They didn't have much, but Isabel's job at the Weston mansion paid enough to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. As she worked, she heard the door to the study open and froze, afraid she had lingered too long in the room. But when she glanced up, her heart nearly stopped. It was Alex. He stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room in an instant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Isabel quickly averted her eyes, her pulse racing. She wasn't used to being in such close proximity to him, at least not when they were alone. "Isabel, right?" Alex's voice broke the silence, calm and deep. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir." He walked further into the room, stopping a few feet away from her. "You don't have to call me sir. It's just Alex." Isabel looked up, surprised by his kindness. Most wealthy people she worked for insisted on formality, but there was something different about Alex. He seemed genuine, his eyes warm despite the air of authority he carried. "All right, Alex," she said, her voice a bit stronger now. He smiled slightly, and Isabel felt her chest tighten. He was handsome, but more than that, there was a softness to him, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. "You've been working here for a while, haven't you?" he asked, leaning casually against the desk. Isabel nodded. "Almost a year now." Alex seemed thoughtful for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds. "I'm sorry if my wife has been difficult. I know she can be hard on the staff." Isabel hesitated, unsure how to respond. It wasn't her place to speak ill of Naya, but she couldn't deny the truth either. "It's fine," she said finally. "I manage." Alex studied her for a moment, and she felt the weight of his gaze. But before the conversation could continue, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening slightly as he read the message. "I have to go," he said, standing up straight again. "But if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to let me know." Isabel nodded, still feeling the heat of his gaze on her even as he turned to leave. As the door closed behind him, she exhaled, her heart pounding in her chest. What had just happened? Isabel hurried through the crowded streets after her shift at the Weston mansion, clutching a bag of groceries to her chest. The city was alive with noise, cars honking, people chattering, vendors shouting out to passers-by. But for Isabel, the city felt distant, like she was walking through it unnoticed. She was used to being invisible, both at work and in life. When she finally reached her small apartment building, she climbed the stairs to the second floor and unlocked the door. Inside, the space was modest and worn, but clean. The scent of lavender filled the air, something her mother loved. "Mom, I'm home," Isabel called softly as she stepped inside. Her mother's voice came from the small living room. "I'm here, sweetheart." Isabel walked in to find her mother sitting in her usual chair by the window, her sightless eyes turned toward the soft afternoon light. She wore a faded blue sweater, and her graying hair was tied back in a simple knot. Despite everything life had thrown at her, losing her sight, the death of Isabel's father, her mother remained strong and composed. "How was work?" her mother asked, her hands moving slightly over the blanket draped across her lap. "Good," Isabel said, setting the groceries down on the kitchen counter. "I picked up some fresh vegetables. I'll make that stew you like tonight." Her mother smiled faintly. "You always take such good care of me. You work too hard." Isabel shrugged it off, though a heaviness sat in her chest. "It's what I have to do. You know that." There was a pause, and Isabel could feel her mother studying her, despite the fact that she couldn't see. "Is something on your mind?" her mother asked softly. Isabel hesitated. She hadn't told her mother much about Alex, or about the strange, fluttering feelings she'd been experiencing lately. But now, standing in the quiet of their little apartment, she felt the need to share her thoughts with someone. "There's someone," Isabel said, leaning against the counter, her arms crossed. Her mother's expression softened. "Someone? At work?" Isabel nodded, then realized her mother couldn't see her. "Yes. The man I work for. Mr. Weston." "Oh?" Her mother's voice was gentle, curious. "Tell me about him." Isabel sighed, unsure of where to begin. "He's different. He's kind. Not like most of the people I've worked for. I think he sees people for who they are. Not just for their station in life. But he's married." Her mother's brow furrowed slightly. "Married? To a woman named Naya. She's..." Isabel struggled to find the right words. "She's difficult. Cruel, even. She treats everyone terribly, including him." "And you? Have feelings for him?" Isabel bit her lip, feeling a rush of embarrassment. "I don't know. Maybe. I'm just confused. He's been kind to me, but I know it's impossible. He's wealthy, and I'm just his cleaner." Her mother was silent for a moment, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the blanket. "Love doesn't care about wealth or status," she said softly. "It finds its way into the heart, no matter the obstacles. But you must be careful, Isabel. If his heart belongs to someone else, you could get hurt." Isabel nodded, knowing her mother was right. "I know. But it's just a feeling. Something I can't control." Her mother smiled faintly, reaching out her hand. Isabel took it, feeling the warmth and reassurance in her mother's touch. "You've always been strong. Whatever happens, remember that you deserve happiness too." Isabel felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Mom." As she turned to start dinner, her mind drifted back to Alex, and she wondered if her mother's words were true. Could love really transcend the barriers of their worlds? Or was she simply fooling herself, getting caught in something that could only lead to heartbreak? Back at the mansion, Alex sat in his study, trying to focus on the paperwork in front of him. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Isabel. He had never noticed her the way he did now. She moved through his house like a quiet breeze, unnoticed by most, but lately, Alex found himself drawn to her. Her presence was soothing, and her eyes, though often downcast, had a softness that stirred something deep inside him. He respected her work ethic, the way she cared for her family. She was so different from the world he lived in, different from Naya, who seemed to be nothing but a storm of demands and cruelty. As he stared at the report in front of him, Alex's mind wandered to the conversation they'd had in his study. It had been brief, but there was something in the way she had spoken to him, the way she had looked at him, that left him wanting more. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. What was he doing? He was married. He had built a life, a business, a reputation. Falling for someone like Isabel, someone so far removed from his world, was reckless. But he couldn't shake the feeling that, for the first time in years, he had found something real. The door creaked open, and Alex looked up to see Isabel quietly entering the room, her cleaning supplies in hand. She hesitated when she saw him, as if she hadn't expected him to still be there. "I can come back later if you're busy." "Sir, I mean Alex," she said, correcting herself. Alex smiled, waving a hand. "It's fine. I could use a break anyway." Isabel nodded and went about her work, dusting the bookshelves and wiping down the surfaces. There was a comfortable silence between them, but the air seemed to hum with unspoken words. After a few minutes, Alex broke the silence. "How's your mother?" he asked, surprising himself with the personal question. Isabel looked up, surprised that he had remembered. "She's doing okay, thank you for asking. It's been hard, but we manage." Alex nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy. "If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask." Isabel paused, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before she quickly looked away. "That's very kind of you, but we're fine." Alex wanted to say more, to offer her more, but he knew it would be inappropriate. Still, the urge to help her, to be part of her life in a way that went beyond employer and employee, was growing stronger. As Isabel finished her cleaning, she turned to leave, but before she could, Alex spoke again. "Isabel. Thank you?" She looked back at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "For what?" "For everything. For being here. For being you." Isabel's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded and left the room, her mind racing. As she walked down the long corridors of the mansion, she felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, excitement, confusion. What was happening between them? Naya was growing restless. Alex had been more distant than ever, spending more time at the office and less time at home. When he was home, he barely spoke to her, and his touch had grown cold. She had tried to ignore it at first, assuming it was just the stress of work. But now, she was sure something else was going on. She stood by the window of the master bedroom, watching as Alex's car pulled into the driveway. He was late again. Naya's fingers clenched the fabric of her dress, her jaw tightening. She had spent her life surrounded by wealth and power, controlling every aspect of her world. But now, her marriage felt like it was slipping through her fingers. As Alex entered the house, Naya was waiting for him in the foyer, her arms crossed. "You're late again," she said, her voice sharp. Alex glanced at her briefly before hanging up his coat. "I had a meeting." Naya's eyes narrowed. "Another meeting? Or is it something else?" Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What are you getting at, Naya?" She stepped closer, her voice low and accusatory. "I know you're hiding something, Alex. You've been distant, distracted. And don't think I haven't noticed the way you've been looking at that cleaner." Alex froze, his heart skipping a beat. Had Naya noticed? He turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "What are you talking about?" Naya's eyes gleamed with jealousy. "You think I don't see it? You think I don't know? You've been spending more time with her than with me. Are you falling for her, Alex? That little nobody?" Alex felt his temper rising, but he kept his voice calm. "This isn't about her, Naya. This is about us. We haven't been happy for a long time, and you know it." Naya's face twisted with rage. "So it's true. You're replacing me with some poor little girl who cleans our floors? Do you have any idea how pathetic that is?" Alex's jaw tightened. "It's not about status or money, Naya. It's about respect, something you've forgotten how to give." Naya's eyes flashed dangerously, her rage barely contained. She stepped closer to Alex, her voice venomous. "Respect? Don't talk to me about respect, Alex. I've given you everything: status, connections, a life most people only dream of. And you're going to throw it all away for some maid?" Alex's patience snapped. "You haven't given me anything, Naya, except control and cruelty. Our marriage has been nothing but a show for your benefit. I've tried to make this work, but I'm done pretending. Naya's mouth twisted into a cold, bitter smile. You think you can just leave me? After everything we've built? You'd be nothing without me, Alex. Nothing. Alex stared at her, his eyes hard. I built my empire with my own hands, Naya. And I've done it while trying to keep some shred of decency. Something you've lost a long time ago. Naya's face reddened with fury. You think you can humiliate me like this? Embarrass me? If you walk out that door for her, Alex, I swear you'll regret it. Alex took a deep breath, the tension in the room almost suffocating. This isn't about her, he said quietly, his voice full of finality. This is about us being over. I can't live like this anymore. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Naya standing in the middle of the foyer, her fists clenched at her sides. As the door closed behind him, Naya's calm facade crumbled, and she let out a low, guttural scream of frustration. She couldn't believe it. Alex, her Alex, was slipping through her fingers, and for what? Some poor girl with no money, no power. Isabel didn't deserve him. And Naya would make sure that she never got the chance. As Naya stood there, trembling with rage, a dark thought crossed her mind. If she couldn't have Alex, no one would. Alex drove through the city, his mind racing. The confrontation with Naya had left him feeling drained, but also strangely liberated. For years, he had been trapped in a loveless marriage, bound by obligation and appearances. But now, he was ready to break free. His thoughts drifted to Isabel. She had become the one bright spot in his otherwise bleak life, her quiet strength and kindness drawing him in like a magnet. He hadn't planned on falling for her, it had just happened. And now, the idea of a life with her, away from the suffocating demands of his current world, was the only thing keeping him sane. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing: Isabel was worth fighting for. Back in the small apartment, Isabel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her conversation with her mother still lingered in her mind, but it wasn't just that. Something inside her told her that the feelings growing between her and Alex were dangerous. He was married, wealthy, powerful, and she was a nobody. There was no way this would end well. She turned over in bed, trying to shake off the thoughts, but they wouldn't leave her. Her mind kept replaying the moments they had shared, the way he had looked at her, spoken to her, the kindness in his eyes. It wasn't just a fling for him, she could tell. He was sincere. But that only made things harder. She sighed softly, pulling the blanket tighter around her. She had never been in love before, and now that it was happening, it felt impossible. Was this what love was supposed to feel like? A mix of hope and fear. Isabel knew one thing for certain: if Naya found out about their growing connection, things would get worse. She had seen the way Naya treated people, especially women she saw as threats. Isabel couldn't imagine what she would do if she ever learned the truth. In the days that followed, Alex and Isabel continued to cross paths, their interactions becoming more charged with unspoken emotions. But both of them knew the danger that hung in the air. They were careful, keeping their conversations brief and their glances hidden, but it was becoming harder to ignore the pull between them. Meanwhile, Naya was making plans of her own. She wasn't the kind of woman who let things slide. And if Alex thought he could just walk away from her without consequences, he was wrong. Very wrong. One afternoon, Naya sat in her private sitting room, her fingers drumming on the arm of the chair. Her mind was racing, calculating her next move. She knew she couldn't take down Alex directly, not without damaging her own reputation. But Isabel was vulnerable. She didn't have the wealth or the connections to protect her. Naya picked up her phone and dialed the number. After a few rings, a man's voice answered. "It's me," Naya said, her voice cool and controlled. "I have a job for you." The man on the other end didn't ask questions. "What do you need?" Naya's lips curled into a cruel smile. There's a woman who needs to be dealt with. Discreetly, of course. The man hesitated. You want her gone? Naya's voice hardened. I want her to disappear. Permanently. There was a pause on the other end of the line before the man responded. Consider it done. Naya hung up the phone, her heart racing. She felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing that soon, Isabel would be out of the picture. And once that was taken care of, she would turn her attention back to Alex. He was hers, and she wasn't about to let anyone take him away. The next evening, Alex found himself standing outside Isabel's apartment building, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't planned on coming here, but after everything that had happened with Naya, he needed to see her. He needed to talk to her. He took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A moment later, Isabel opened it, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw him. Alex? What are you doing here? I needed to see you, he said, his voice soft but urgent. Can I come in? Isabel hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. Once the door was closed, Alex turned to face her, his expression serious. I can't keep doing this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't pretend like everything's fine at home when it's not. Naya and we're done. I told her I'm leaving. Isabel's heart raced as she looked at him, a mix of relief and fear flooding through her. Alex, I don't know if this is, he took a step closer, his eyes locking onto hers. I'm in love with you, Isabel. I've tried to fight it, to deny it, but I can't. You've brought light back into my life, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Isabel felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had been trying so hard to keep her feelings at bay, to protect herself from getting hurt. But hearing those words from him, words she had never imagined he would say, broke down the wall she had built. I love you too, she whispered, her voice trembling. Alex reached out, gently taking her hand in his. Then come with me. Let's leave all of this behind. We can start over, somewhere far away from here, far away from Naya. Isabel's heart swelled with hope, but at the same time, fear gnawed at her. She wanted to be with him, more than anything. But she knew Naya wouldn't let them go so easily. What about your wife? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She won't just let you walk away. Alex's expression darkened. I'll handle Naya. I'm not afraid of her. But as he said the words, a chill ran down Isabel's spine. Something told her that Naya was more dangerous than either of them realized, unbeknownst to Alex and Isabel. Naya's plan was already in motion. She had hired a man, someone with no scruples, someone who didn't ask questions. Isabel's days were numbered, and Naya knew it. As she sat in the back of her luxury car, being driven through the city, Naya felt a sick sense of satisfaction. Everything was falling into place. Soon, Alex would see that he had no choice but to stay with her. Without Isabel, he would have nowhere else to turn. Naya's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from the man she had hired. It's done. Naya smiled, slipping her phone back into her purse. Soon, Isabel would be nothing more than a memory. But little did Naya know, fate had other plans. The night was dark as Isabel made her way home after a long day. The streets were quieter than usual, and a strange unease settled over her. She clutched her bag a little tighter as she hurried along the narrow alley leading to her apartment. As she approached the last corner, she heard footsteps behind her. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was following her. Isabel's heart began to race, and she quickened her pace. The footsteps behind her grew louder. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm, pulling her back with a force that sent her stumbling. She let out a terrified scream, but before she could react, a shadowy figure loomed over her. Shut up, a gruff voice growled. Tightening his grip, Isabel struggled, fear surging through her, but the man was too strong. He yanked her toward a darkened alley, where no one would see or hear them. Her mind raced. Was this Naya's doing? Was this how she planned to get rid of her? Just as she was about to lose hope, a car screeched to a halt at the entrance of the alley. The headlights illuminated the scene, and a voice called out, "Hey! Let her go!" The man hesitated for a split second, distracted by the interruption, and in that moment, Isabel wrenched herself free and ran. The car door opened, and to her surprise, Alex stepped out, his face filled with worry. "Isabel, get in the car!" he shouted, without thinking. Isabel dashed toward him, and Alex pulled her inside. The man who had attacked her vanished into the darkness as Alex sped away, his heart pounding as hard as hers. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with concern, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Isabel was trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. I think Naya sent him. She wants me gone." Alex's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I'll make sure she never touches you again. I swear it." Isabel nodded, but a deep sense of dread lingered. If Naya was willing to go this far, who knew what she would do next? Alex didn't drive Isabel home. Instead, he took her to a place outside the city, a small cottage hidden away in the woods that he had bought years ago as a retreat. It was quiet and secluded, far from Naya's reach, or so he hoped. As they pulled up to the cottage, Isabel looked around, her heart still racing. "Where are we?" "It's a place I used to come to when I needed to get away from everything," Alex explained, turning off the car and stepping out. "You'll be safe here." He opened the door for Isabel, and she stepped out, still shaken by the events of the night. The air was cool, and the woods around them were eerily quiet. But there was something comforting about the isolation. Inside the cottage, the air was warm and cozy, the furniture simple but welcoming. Isabel sat down on the couch, her mind still reeling. Alex knelt beside her, his face filled with concern. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, taking her hands in his. "I never should have let this happen." "It's not your fault," Isabel said softly, her voice trembling. "But Naya, she won't stop. I don't know how far she'll go." Alex's jaw tightened. "I'll deal with her. I promise you, Isabel, she won't hurt you again." Isabel looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and the love there. Despite everything, she felt a sense of safety in his presence. She leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. "I'm scared, Alex," she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I know. But I won't let anything happen to you. Not now, not ever." Back in the mansion, Naya paced the floor of her lavish bedroom, furious. The man she had hired had failed. Isabel was still alive, and Alex had spirited her away somewhere. She clenched her fists, her mind racing. How could this be happening? How could Alex defy her like this? She grabbed her phone and dialed the number of the man who had botched the job. When he answered, she didn't even give him a chance to speak. "You had one job," she hissed. "And you failed." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Weston," the man stammered. "He showed up before I could." "I don't want excuses," Naya snapped. "I want results. Do you understand?" There was a brief pause before the man spoke again. "Yes. I'll make sure it's done. This time, no mistakes." Naya ended the call, her blood boiling. Alex thought he could just walk away, but he was wrong. She wasn't done with him yet. The next morning, Alex sat at the small wooden table in the cottage, his laptop open in front of him. He had made some calls, put things in place to ensure that Isabel would be safe. But he knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, he would have to confront Naya head-on. Isabel emerged from the bedroom, looking exhausted but determined. "What's the plan?" she asked, sitting across from him. Alex took a deep breath. "We're leaving the city. I've arranged for a private plane to take us somewhere safe. But before we go, I need to talk to Naya. I can't leave things like this." Isabel's heart skipped a beat. "Talk to her?" "Alex, she tried to have me killed. You can't trust her." I know, Alex said, reaching across the table to take her hand. But I need to make it clear that I'm done with her, once and for all. After that, we'll disappear. I won't let her touch you again. Isabel nodded, though fear still gnawed at her. Just be careful. I will. Later that day, Alex drove back to the mansion, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had to do. He didn't know how Naya would react, but he was done living in fear of her wrath. He had to end this, once and for all. When he walked into the house, he found Naya waiting for him in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as he entered, her eyes cold and calculating. So, you've finally come home, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Alex stood tall, his expression hard. This is over, Naya. I'm leaving, and I'm taking Isabel with me. Naya's smile faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. You really think you can just walk away from me? After everything? Yes, Alex said firmly. I'm done with this marriage. I'm done with you. Naya's eyes darkened, and she set her wine glass down with a sharp clink. You think you can just walk out on me? After everything I've done for you? For us? This isn't about us anymore, Naya, Alex said, his voice steady. This is about you and the way you've treated everyone around you, including me. I've had enough. Naya's face twisted in anger. You think you can be happy with her? That little nobody? She's nothing compared to me. Alex met her gaze, unflinching. Isabel has more kindness, more heart, in her little finger than you've ever had in your entire life. Naya's eyes burned with fury, but she didn't say another word. She simply watched as Alex turned and walked out of the room, her mind racing with thoughts of revenge. Naya's lawyer delivered an ultimatum to Alex's team, settled the divorce with favorable terms for Naya, or they would drag Isabel further into the mud. Naya was willing to ruin everything if it meant keeping her claws in Alex. She would take half of everything he owned and make sure Isabel could never live in peace. Alex stared at the document his lawyer had handed him, feeling the weight of the decision. His company, Sky Corp, his reputation, everything he had built, was now at risk. But what tore at him the most was the thought of Isabel being caught in the crossfire. This is madness, Alex muttered, pacing the room. She's willing to destroy everything just to punish me. His lawyer nodded grimly. She knows she can't control you anymore, so she's trying to control the narrative. If you give in, you'll be tied to her forever. But if you fight back, things could get even messier. Alex sat down, his hands clenched into fists. He thought about Isabel, about everything they had been through, and how Naya had done everything in her power to rip them apart. He couldn't let her win. Not like this. No, Alex said firmly. We're not settling. I'll fight her to the end. Isabel had packed a small bag, her heart heavy with the decision she had made. She couldn't bear to see Alex lose everything because of her. The love they shared was real, but the storm that surrounded them felt overwhelming. She didn't want to be the cause of his downfall, even if it meant walking away from the only happiness she had ever known. As she stepped out of the bedroom, she found Alex waiting for her by the door. He had known something was wrong, had sensed it in the way she had been distant the past few days. The sight of her bag confirmed his worst fears. You're really going to leave? Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabel's heart ached at the pain in his eyes. I think it's for the best, Alex. I can't keep watching you get hurt because of me. Naya won't stop, and I don't want to be the reason your life falls apart. Alex crossed the room and gently cupped her face in his hands. Isabel, don't you see? My life was already falling apart before I met you. You're the only thing that's held me together through all of this. Tears welled up in Isabel's eyes as she tried to speak, but Alex pulled her into a tight embrace, his voice thick with emotion. I don't care what Naya does, or what the world thinks. I love you, Isabel, and I'm not going to lose you because of her. Isabel pulled back slightly, looking up into his eyes. But your company, your reputation, Alex shook his head. None of that matters if I don't have you. We'll fight this together. I'm not going to let her win. Not over us. Isabel stared into his eyes, searching for doubt, but all she saw was determination and love. She had tried to be strong for him, but in that moment, she realized that Alex wasn't going to give up on them. He would fight for their love, no matter the cost. Okay, Isabel whispered, her voice breaking. We'll fight. Alex smiled, his heart swelling with relief. He pulled her close again, pressing his forehead to hers. Together. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, Isabel felt hope. Despite all the chaos, despite the darkness that Naya had tried to throw over their lives, there was light. There was love. And as long as they had each other, they could survive anything. The next morning, Alex and Isabel stood together, united as they faced the storm ahead. Naya's threats, the public scandal, the legal battles, it would all take time to resolve. But they would fight side by side. Refusing to let the darkness tear them apart, Alex called his lawyer and gave the order to continue with the divorce proceedings, refusing to settle on Naya's terms. He knew it would be a brutal battle, but he was ready. No more running, no more hiding. This was a fight for his freedom, for his future, and for the woman he loved. Isabel, too, found strength she didn't know she had. She stood tall, knowing that no matter what the world thought of her, the love she shared with Alex was real. And that was worth fighting for. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, knowing that love, true, unbreakable love, could conquer even the darkest of enemies. Months later, after a long and bitter legal battle, the divorce was finalized. Naya had tried every tactic, every dirty trick, but in the end, Alex had won. He had retained control of his company and his reputation, and more importantly, he had retained the love of his life. Isabel stood with Alex at the edge of the estate they now shared, a peaceful home far away from the chaos of the city. The air was fresh, the skies clear, and for the first time in a long time, Isabel felt at peace. Are you happy? Alex asked, wrapping his arms around her as they looked out over the horizon. Isabel smiled, resting her head against his chest. Happier than I ever thought I could be. Alex kissed the top of her head. We made it. We survived. And they had. Through the storm of scandal, betrayal, and heartbreak, they had come out stronger. Their love had been tested, but it had endured. And now, they were free to build the life they had always dreamed of, together. As the sun set on the horizon, Alex and Isabel stood hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. Their love had conquered the darkness, and now, their future was theirs to write.